right. Good afternoon, everyone. Just got a couple more people joining. If you are joining, if you just wouldn't mind putting yourselves on mute, just so we don't have any of that background noise coming through. All right. All right, looks like we've got a fair few people joining, so we might kick off, Mark. So hello, everyone. A very happy Friday and almost the weekend to everybody. So thank you for joining us for today's session, which is actually a follow-on from one of our previous sessions, which we talked through resource management. So today, Mark will be taking you through a resource management maturity model. So just some housekeeping notes as usual. We just ask that you please remain on mute throughout the presentation and while other attendees are talking. But please, if you do have any questions or comments that you'd like to add, it's a very casual conversation, very casual group. So please just feel free to either raise your hand or pop your question in the chat and we'll work through them as they come through. So today we have Mark Soyster, our Executive Director from Sensei, taking us through this session. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you, lovely people from all over Australia. Thanks for sacrificing your lunch break for this wonderful topic of resource management. As Alice already outlined, we had a couple of weeks ago, we had already a resource management Ask the Expert session where we really went through the basics of resource management, and due to a lot of interest and additional information requests, we decided to have a follow-up session. Now, that does not mean that if you have not attended the last session that you that you can't follow. I will make sure that that's obviously the case, and hence the reason why I'm going to just rehash a little bit of the basics of resource management and what resource management actually constitutes. I will then move into the resource management maturity model, especially around organizations that struggle with ensuring resources are allocated in a manner that work can be achieved. I will then go a little bit more into those models and outline how you could start that journey if you are not already on that journey itself. And then, of course, as Alice already outlined, please, if you have any questions, raise your hands or push it into the chat box. This is quite informal. The whole idea really is to exchange our experience on one hand, and of course also hopefully that you have the ability to get some takeaways. So let's start with, well, what is actually resource management and what constitutes resource management? For those of you who have been in my last session, there will be the first 2-3 slides will be repetitive just to set the scene for those of you who have not been able to attend the last session. So really, resource management for us means to ensure that we utilize our resource pool in the most efficient way so that we can accomplish the work that we as an organization set out to do. Now, in order for us to do that, we actually have a whole bunch of different capabilities on one hand, and today really is a lot about capability. But before I ask that, I would like to know whether or if you currently use a resource management tool in your own organization. So you will find that there's a poll. It would be great if you could answer them, just so that we have a bit of an understanding how you manage your current resource pool at all. So you have the ability to select that and submit your answer, and let's have a look what those results are. How many people do we currently have? I think we have quite a few. So I can see we've got 14 respondents. I know we have a little bit more, 20. There we go. And of course, a very big runner here is Excel with 30%, unsurprisingly, of course, and Project Online being the other 30%. MS Project, of course, and some in-house build solutions, and we can see that Project Online is sort of that starter. I would think that most of you have in some form a resource management tool to ensure that you can balance those workloads. Interestingly enough, most organizations do have Excel actually, and struggle still with that visibility. I know we all love Excel. However, ultimately, we need to make sure that we put reality behind data. And as beautiful Excel and flexible Excel is, it is unfortunately also probably the one that has least visibility when it comes to that. I can just see Veda hearing a lot of echo noise. I'm sorry. Is that the case for others as well? If that's the case, I hope it's not me. I will have to keep my my mic open though, unfortunately, so that well, unfortunate that you can hear me. Well, look, just to continue that story, really challenges when it comes to resource management generally really are quite broad, but resource ownership is one of those areas, of course, where we don't really know who can we ask for some resources, as well as non-trusted current workload forecast, the ability for us to not only short-term but long-term have a capacity planning so that we can potentially hire the right resources depending on the type of work we do. Lack of resource visibility overarchingly, so that I don't know who is over or under allocated, who can I actually currently use in my workload. And when I talk about workload, it's not just project work, but it is actually business as usual work, program portfolio work, so anything that constitutes things to be done, really. In constant firefighting mode, we hear this all the time because we don't have that visibility. People feel quite stressed because they always need to work quicker than what they anticipated to work. So that constant firefighting seems to be one of those main challenges, and therefore subsequently have the feeling that we never have enough time. If we can plan our time going forward, then these stress levels, of course, start to disappear. Everything is done manually. The Excel world, as I like to call it, where project managers or even team leads have to manually trying to forecast that overarching picture. When I then constitute that in main reasons why we have resource management in our organization, resource visibility, of course, work and resource optimization from an organizational perspective is super important for us. And of course, that long-term forward planning, resource capacity planning, the ability for us to hire at the right time. There are lots of industries right now that struggle with hiring and therefore need to have that longer term planning, because we can't just pick up resources from one day to the next. Realistic short-term resource planning and execution, in particular when we're talking about projects that need to be executed. All too often do we hear that projects are running late because they are bottlenecked by lack of resources. And after all, we want to make sure that we eliminate the burnout effect. We hear it all too often. Projects, they have 2 days left before they're meant to be completed, but still have 5 days worth of work. And then of course we have to all work 24 hours a day, weekend, and that burnout effect will ultimately also burn out our staff. And then we want to make sure that the resources that we have, which are real capital to our organization, that we increase that business value through, we don't do that, that's good. So that we increase that business value, of course, for the organization, optimizing the workload balance between the resources that we have. Now, the last slide that I will do from last time, and then I'll start getting into the project management maturity, is really just general resource management terminology, because resource management is not equal resource management, as I like to call that. The reason being is we have different purposes for resource management and different roles to look at that. On one hand, of course, we want to know the historical actuals. We determine that through things like timesheets. What have I actually done? We then have that near-term need. Hey, what are you going to do next week or over the next 2 weeks? And then we have that long-term need, of course, saying, hey, what type of FTEs do we need to hire going forward? And when I think about that from a terminology perspective, capacity planning for us is always long-term long-term forecasting, the ability for us to determine how many FTEs do I have, in comparison to the more near-term capability where we want to allocate resources to work. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need to assign them to tasks, but really ensuring that that a project manager has dedicated resources that have been allocated to that particular workload, whether that's project work or BAU work. And then once a resource is allocated to a project or to a team, then we have team management, and I call it consciously team management. We could call it assignment of tasks, but because of our different work planning capabilities, it is not always assigning our work or our resources to a certain amount of time to a task. And we see that in particular in the agile world, where we have to groom a backlog and run tasks through the board, where we don't have the the planning forecast of saying this task is going to take us 3 days or 5 days or 10 days. So on one hand, we have the schedules, that waterfall capability where I look at tasks over time. On the other hand, I have these Kanban capabilities where I have a dedicated team that just works through burning down the tasks. And then, of course, we also have business as usual work, the things that I need to do every day and that I need to schedule in. Now, when I think about comparing what I have planned in comparison to what I have done, resource tracking is super important, and we generally do this through the usage of timesheets. Timesheets constitute the actual work that I have done so that I can compare that against the planned work. And then last but not least, as an individual, I need to manage my own work. I may be assigned to multiple projects or to BAU end projects, and I need to have that overarching view, knowing exactly what kind of work I need to do. So these are generally the terminologies that we use when we talk about resource management and the need to manage resources. Well, of course, resource management is not equal. Resource management also means work is not equal work. When we talk about work, on one hand, of course, we talk about project work, the traditional work versus the agile work. And on the other hand, we talk about business as usual work, the operational work, non-project work, like, organizational meetings or even training. And of course, non-working time, the holidays that we have, which ultimately reduces our capacity of working for the organization. However, when we talk about work in the context of resource management, we will always talk about work that needs to be planned. The reason for resource management is that I can look forward and ensure that I balance my resources against the work. So that was really a very quick overview of what we spoke about the last time. And then the big question was, well, how do I ensure that I as an organization can actually start from nowhere to somewhere? And that's where we then said, okay, let's start talking about a resource management maturity model, which really is a formal way to increase your resource management within your organization. The information that I will present over the next couple of slides are based on the Resource Management Institute. It's an awesome institute that really focuses around resource management and how we as an organization have the ability to ensure that we optimize our resources against the work. Just like in the project management maturity model, we have 5 different levels here. And as you can see, things like level 1, where we don't have anything, where we just simply do resource management ad hoc, to level 2, where we do that ad hoc in a little process, in an informal process, all the way to a documented, embedded, and actually ultimately strategic, globally functioning resource model, so that I can strategically plan ahead. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a short while. The Resource Management Institute had some really good surveys over the last couple of years, and I wanted to share that with you, maybe on one hand to make you feel better, if you don't have any kind of resource management model, and on the other hand, to give you a little bit of inspiration of how you could actually go about implementing a resource management model. So the first, one of the first questions that I thought was super interesting is, do you actually have a formally documented resource management process? And that was one of those questions that very clearly outlined, well, first of all, what type of organization generally manages resources? And for us, resources is in the context of our resource management, we are talking about exclusively human resource management. Of course, resources can also constitute materials, bill of materials, etc. In the Resource Management Institute, we predominantly talk about the concept of human resources. So you can see professional and consulting organization where human resources is real capital. Of course, for them, it is super important to have a resource management model in comparison to, I'm going to call it the enterprises or the different departments within an enterprise. As you can see that 73% of consulting services, of course, have that resource management model, and only 27% of bigger enterprises actually put a lot of emphasis around a formal process, which I thought was interesting. That also translates to well, considering the formally documented resource management process, do you have that in your organization? A lot of organizations say yes, they do have that, and we can see the good news here is nearly 80% have some kind of process documented. The other question, of course, is documenting a process is one thing. Inhaling that process is ultimately what we need to accomplish. I always say that leading a horse to the water is one thing, but making it drink or drown is the other part. So documenting is often not enough. Same with project management processes, by the way. So you can see the documentation of it is absolutely there, which is interesting to see. And one of these other surveys that was outlined here is, how did you develop your resource management process? Super interesting question, and you can see the vast majority of organizations determines that internally, where they try to incorporate a process that works for them internally. And that makes, in many ways, a lot of sense when you think about it, because every organization is slightly different and operates slightly different. However, it also means that when you do this internally, you will at the start probably do the general mistakes that we always do when we start something new, and then you need to grow into that project management maturity. Talking to peers, interesting is hardly ever, even though we do want to learn, of course, from equals, and then adopted the well, just-in-time resource management approach. That is actually a globally recognized approach, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then, of course, other industry sources are there. So JITR really stands for just-in-time resourcing. It's a resourcing model that you can look up under the Resource Management Institute that sort of outlines a common process of how you can actually ensure that your resource management maturity is managed in a structured manner. You will find we will provide you with quite a lot of collateral after the session here around the Resource Management Institute, so that you have that for your own for your own benefit as well. So if you don't know where to start, well, industry standards is usually always a very good start because it gives you that framework. All right, so these are a couple of surveys that I thought are super interesting that hopefully make us feel better or less better, depending on where you are in that journey. But in order for us to determine that, I've got another survey here that I would like to ask you, what is your top priority when you think about resource management? Is it resource visibility or resource optimization? Is it long-term resource capacity planning? Or is it actually understanding what kind of work has actually been completed? In your own environment or for you personally, what do you think is the top priority when it comes to resource management? Now, submitting that, yeah, think about it for a moment, whoop, and there we come. The first 20 respondents are there. And of course, these respondents, you can see that in the chat window, 23 respondents. We've got a little bit more. Come on, we can do that. Thank you very much. And that's a very interesting result here. So resource visibility with 21% versus resource optimization, which is 36%, versus long-term resource capacity planning, which is now also 36, actually now 37%. So resource optimization, ensuring that we get the most out of our resources in comparison to what type of resources do I actually need, is sort of that up running winner, which is interesting. Thank you for participating here. Now, of course, the Resource Management Institute did a very similar survey, and I thought I'll share that with you. They had a couple of different areas here, but what is the primary objective for effective resource management? And again, you can see improve utilization, cost effectiveness. I think that goes in hand with the optimization of the resources on the survey that we've just seen, is again by far actually one of the main reason why we do that. Timely project staffing so that we are not late is the second runner here, and then capacity planning. So, you know, it's interesting industry-wide as well as people here on the call. We can see that that is actually you know, very consistent. Now, a couple of more areas. That's the last slide that outlines the survey, and then I want to go a little bit more into the project management maturity model. Is, you know, how would you rate the level of maturity and adoption of resource management in your own organization, and how interesting, you know, 16% of the organization says, yeah, look, we are high, medium is 51, and low 33%. So a lot of organizations do rate themselves as actually being quite efficient when it comes to resource management. And after I will do the last survey, I will actually open up the microphone, and I would love to hear what you perceive your own organization to be when it comes to project management maturity. However, before we do that, let's just go a little bit deeper into this resource management maturity model, just so that you can also ascertain where you currently are. So as I said earlier, you know, level 1 is really, there's no documentation. It's all very, ad hoc and not proactive, but reactive in many ways. That's where we mostly start. Also depending, of course, on the type of industry that you are working into. Then level 2, where we have an ad hoc resource management process, quite informal, but we do enable that by potentially multiple systems where every department may have their, or every team lead have their own Excel spreadsheet that they maintain, or they may have something developed in-house. So the ability for us to just have some kind of indication in comparison to level 3, where we now literally have a documented process where we monitor that process in regards to compliance, and therefore, of course, also start to get a little bit more trustworthy visibility compared to level 4, where we actually have the ability to predict timely and accurate data for analytical purposes. Not only that forward planning, but improving the way that we allocate resources over time will be part of that level 4 to all the way level 5, where actually executive management has the ability to strategically plan ahead when it comes to their resource capital and embed that in their strategy. So just as an indicator, these are sort of these 5 levels of maturity. Yeah, I'd love to have your opinion, your personal view. I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but literally your personal view. Where would you measure your current resource management maturity model when it comes to your own organization? So yeah, I'd love to see what your feedback is. So we've got our first respondents. Yeah, think about it, because this is I know gut feeling is often difficult to measure. We've got 18 respondents. I know we've got many. Oh, yeah, there are some more respondents. Yeah, interesting. Level 2 is starting to sort of crystallize itself out, where we do have some ad hoc individual departmental views. And yeah, I can see, based on our current 28 responses, level 2 by far outweighs that 42% in comparison to the next one, which is level 3, 26%. But we also definitely have some level 1 and level 4. No level 5. Now that's interesting. Considering that resources are quite a big investment, it is interesting to see that organizations don't focus all the way down that path. So yeah, thank you for your respondents. And with that, I'm going to open up your mic and would love to have some feedback on your personal experience of how the journey of resource management is in your organization, with potential challenges that you currently face, or also maybe share some, some battle stories of what worked and what didn't work. And just so that I said it, that resource management maturity model from the RMI will be part of the pack that we will send out after that session, so that you have that for your records as well. So is there anyone brave enough to open their microphone and share their battle stories? Don't be shy. It stays between us. Joe, please.
Hi, Mark. Joe Stalder. I'm calling from the Bay Area out on the west coast of the US.
Wow.
And my colleague Mindy has joined too. We might be able to kind of share stories here. We're at a small pharmaceutical company based out of San Diego. I think we're 400 people now. When we started our resource management capability, it was about 150, and we knew we were going to grow. So we wanted to kind of get ahead of it. And we started by defining discrete work packages, because we thought that would be the easiest to resource against. Then we went to each of the functions and we said, okay, if we have one clinical trial of a standard kind of size, how many of each resource would you need to support it? And we built a generic out of that, kind of a model that we could apply to future studies, either within our book of work or in the future that we don't have planned yet. And we tried to model out what the resource demand would look like. Then we got kind of stuck, because the functions came back and said, well, this is good for your book of work, but what about the unplanned work? What about things that pop up, or what you call business as usual? We didn't model that out. And that's where they said, okay, this is useless for us, because we need to understand the full scope of the work activities.
How interesting, Joe. Well, look, I think the approach of mapping the work package to the resource needs is a very sensible approach, especially in the project management world. I wonder how you overcome that business as usual challenge, because ultimately I would think you could break down the business as usual component also in sizable work packages, wouldn't you think?
We could do like just a bucket for, every function has 10% business as usual overhead, something like that. Here's another kind of nuance. We only do resourcing at the role level. We don't get down to the individual level, because we don't have dedicated resource managers.
Okay.
So I'd be curious to hear from other people on the call. Do you do individual level resource management or role level resource management at your companies?
That's a great question. Yeah, let's open that up. Can someone give us their experience? And Joe, thank you very much for sharing that. I think very common and smart approach, mapping the work packages to the resource needs, because on one hand it will allow you to actually optimize your estimation process going forward, which is great, and on the other hand you will also be able to do that classical capacity planning, knowing exactly what kind of roles you need based on the workload that you're going to have. Yeah, so anyone else that actually has mapped generic or roles-based resources to named resources? All right, don't be shy. Yeah, look, I know how difficult that is. And I think it's also a little bit industry specific. I can tell you from our point of view, we of course do that because as a professional services organization, we need to, on one hand, provide our customers with an estimation based on a particular skill set. So generically, project manager, technical resource, business subject matter expert, and then that role will constitute certain skills that we then map to named resources where we literally have the ability now for a project manager to request a generic resource, and then the resource manager who is in charge of that role has the ability to assign that named resource to the generic resource. Well,
hey Mark, I work for Essential Energy here in New South Wales, Australia, and Essential Energy is a utilities provider for New South Wales public. We are like an asset management organization. I look after the poles and wires. So we are currently running a massive transformation program ourselves. One of the approaches that we have taken as part, and we have kind of matured in the way we have progressed in doing this. So I would say we have captured all our resourcing demand at a project level, not at a task level. And that goes both with unfilled demand as well as demand that we have people we know that can work on projects. Yeah, so we basically ask each projects to capture that information, and using Project Online, we get a visibility of each projects individually that gets rolled up at a portfolio level, and then we get the demand, both filled as well as unfilled demand, the whole portfolio level. And that also helps us to do resource capacity planning, which is we pretty much get a view of who all are working on what kind of projects, as well as we look at the resource contentions in terms of projects allocating similar resources across multiple projects, and then they get over allocated. And this is also then gives a good visibility to our HR services and recruitment team in terms of the unfilled demand, and then gives them that visibility of what is the demand coming up from the projects. And we have very recently started documenting all our processes in terms of what we are expecting each, like we did a very recent exercise where we looked at the whole ecosystem of our resource management, and it was so complex. Everybody was surprised. I'm actually surprised, but not surprised, given the issues and concerns that we were facing for each projects. And given the market currently that we have, I'm not sure if it is faced elsewhere outside Australia, but there is such a crunch in terms of getting resources from outside. But then these other steps that we have kind of put, I don't know what maturity this is, but we have documents and stuff in place. We have system in place. We have educated our project managers. We are getting real-time data in terms of what our capacity planning looks like. The only thing that I don't think so we are doing is work management, because we haven't asked projects to go around putting each resources at a task level to tell us what they are doing.
That's great. Thank you, Val. That makes so much sense. And look, I compare that, and I actually have a couple of slides on that going forward. I compare that allocation versus assignment. Allocation happens on a project level. And that is really the ability for me as a project manager to determine what type of resources I need over time. I may get that picture through my schedule, through my bottom-up schedule, but ultimately the allocation on a project level, I think, is a very smart idea, Val, because trying to do resource management on a task-based or schedule-based environment is extremely difficult, because project managers need to be able to be very rigorous in regards to that. I have a slide for that, and I'm sure you will find that actually most helpful gut feel, just from what you've just outlined, well clearly documented and starting to get some data, you're probably already on level 3 to 4 when it comes to that resource management model. However, when we send you out the paper, maybe it's a good exercise just to outline that and also communicate to the executive managers where you are in that stage, because that also means that the hard work that you have been doing in Essential Energy is actually paying out, right? I think that's super important. Thank you for sharing that. Well, that's awesome. All right. Well, again, this resource management maturity model will come about. Now, for those of you, and thank you for the poll, Alison, there was the question, do you do resource management on an individual or role-based level? Actually, it wasn't all that different. It was almost a 50-50, where there's still a little bit more role-based in comparison to individual-based. But, we do have people here on the call that do individual-based resource management. Super interesting. So the big question for those of you who may have not started that journey, well, where to start from here? Well, where to start from here? There is actually a structure which is called the full circle resource management structure that you may be able to utilize. What that ultimately institutes are different phases that mirror project delivery life cycle, and from that I actually extend that also to the BAU life cycle, because BAU in many ways is nothing else than a constant forward planning of something that I need to do. And as well said, as Joe said before, and maybe 10% of my resources do BAU, or I just assign 90% of my resources to project work. So that's definitely a possibility. So the way that you can start is really in the estimation process. And Joe already mentioned it. Hey, we created our work package and we determined how much time and effort do we need and what type of resources do we need based on those packages. I think that's very smart. From then on, you have the ability to plan that out, and you can either do this based on a role or even based on a named resources. And I'll show you in a second how that can actually apply. You then deliver that, track the actuals, really. You analyze that data. Hey, what did I estimate at the start? How did I plan it? How did I actually deliver it? And then based on that analytical data-driven function, you can actually optimize not only your estimation process, but ultimately also your resource demand. So this is in our experience actually a very good starting point for you to go down this journey of resource management maturity modeling. So I hope that that will give you at least a little bit of an indication. However, I am going to I call it the devil is in the detail, and well, you've outlined it beautifully. The difference for us really is allocation versus assignment. And I'm not suggesting that assigning resources and tasks, resources to tasks and managing that schedule and trying to get that bigger picture is the wrong approach. For the right organization, that is the right approach. But you know what? Resource management at the best of times is hard, and maintaining a schedule on a regular basis is actually quite time consuming. Well, why do I say that? Well, let's talk about assignment first. So assignment for us really means that we have a schedule and we have tasks. Now, a lot of people think that tasks is the lowest level of a schedule when it comes to data granularity, but that's not the case. It is actually assigning resources to a task or multiple resources to a task. That is the lowest granularity, the so-called assignment. Now, when you think about that in a classical schedule, you manage time-phased data. And the type of information that you managed in that schedule is, of course, duration, the amount of time, effort, the work that needs to be done in order to complete that particular task, which is the planned effort. Could also be, of course, baseline effort, the actual effort, how much do I have, which then allows me to determine, well, how much more do I need, the remaining effort. And that, when you have that information, then needs to be rescheduled so that the planned work that you may have planned but didn't complete needs to be moving forward into into the future. So that's really what how you manage resources in a schedule. A Gantt chart alone is actually not enough, because a Gantt chart only ever shows you the task. In things like MS Project and Project Online, well, you mentioned you use Project Online, the assignment view or usage view is actually representing that, just so that you can see that picture. We essentially have have tasks, and then we have resources assigned to it, and work, which is another term for effort, is the planned work. And of course, I then can update almost in an Excel-like, in an Excel-like environment. The sorry, let me just go back. That happens when I touch too much. Here we go. You can then update the actuals, or you get that through timesheets. Works technically like a treat, but I tell you, it's really hard to maintain. It's like a domino effect. If one project manager fails to reschedule their project, well, the whole picture falls over. And that makes it so really, really difficult. So we do this internally at Sensei. We use that model right now because it's very important for us to determine the effort, but we also see how time consuming that can be. And not only that, when you think about assignment, you can do this in a classical waterfall schedule. But if you think about it from a pure agile point of view, well, think about assignment in a Kanban environment. Well, a Kanban environment really doesn't have a time-phased view. You have tasks in your backlog, and these tasks may have certain ways for you to determine how much time it takes. This could be story points. This could be, T-shirt sizes. It could be anything that your team feels comfortable with, but it's not time-phased. It doesn't say, hey, my task 1, which is up next, it's going to be implemented on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. So that time-phased approach just does not happen, and therefore resource management in an agile environment is, when it comes to scheduling or execution, is actually quite impossible. That's why a lot of that's why Kanban or Agile actually is really a team-centric project, meaning that you have a dedicated team always on that project, which of course makes then resource management quite easy, because if I have a team of 5 and I have 5 sprints, well, I know 10 weeks for those 5 people that are going to be allocated there. So be aware, in a Kanban environment, you don't have that time-phased data. Yes, you can assign a resource to a task, but you don't manage actual and remaining. You run the task through the Kanban board of what's up next and in development, or however you structure your Kanban board. So this is assignment level information, possible and very detailed, but be aware, very time consuming. Most organizations, and again I'll refer to Val there, actually have what I would refer to as an allocation view, where we literally start to look at a resource plan. We may not even have a schedule yet, but we still know what the type of workload is. Or we may have a detailed schedule and then translate that schedule requirement into the resource plan of the project. The reason why that is important is, on one hand, it is a higher granularity, so therefore the effort required is less than managing a schedule. And secondly, you have the assurance through that resource plan and that approval process that these resources are dedicated to your own project. So in this example, and I run through a quick demo just so that you can see that at the end of the session here. In that example, I can request resources, generic resources, and my project manager, my resource manager can actually approve those those resources for your project based on named resources. So just comparing that again, allocation really means I, as a project manager, want to be able to request resources through a resource plan. And I can do this already, by the way, in a business case stage, which then translate the resources, and once the business case is approved, moves that into the project in its own right, where by then the resource manager has the ability to review that and can look at the availability of their named resources and approve those resource requests that then goes back to the project manager. What the project manager then does is then they start dishing out the work to the resources. Now, you may have done that already at the start in order to determine the resources through your schedule, or once you have these resources assigned to you, you start assigning them to tasks. As I mentioned, Agile is very much that way, where you groom your backlog. That way, and that's super important, that way as an organization, you can actually use multiple execution tools that are appropriate for the right job. So in my IT, I may use JIRT for Kanbaning or DevOps, and in my in my marketing department, a planner or a Monday.com or an Asana may be sufficient to have just simply a little Kanban board, or a very professional project manager, or where you need to have that timeline or that Gantt chart view, uses Project Online. And no matter what type of schedule tool you use, and most large organizations have different execution tools, you can still manage your resources on that resource management plan. So we will always determine the top-down allocation of a resource to a project in comparison to the bottom-up assignment of tasks that constitutes then the need of a particular resource. So very, very important to understand that. Joe.
While you're on this slide and you have the examples of Planner and Project Online and Project for the Web, I wonder if you can comment on what I perceive as a disconnect between those systems when it comes to resource management. In Project Online, you can create very detailed Gantt charts that capture the resources. It doesn't translate to Project for the Web, and it doesn't translate to Planner. Your resources don't carry over into Planner cards.
Great. Yeah. So yes, I will talk about that a little bit more. So if you do Project Online, the exclusive way of how you manage resources is by managing it in that particular schedule tool. That's why user adoption in Project Online can actually be quite difficult, because it requires you to have a certain amount of knowledge in that schedule capability. So we recognized that a long time ago, and there are actually only very few tools that allow you to incorporate Planner, Project Online, and Project for the Web in one. So Sensei IQ is designed to do exactly that, because we are supporting any type of schedule tools. For us, the commonality is the resource plan, which acts almost like an umbrella above the project, and then the task that we synchronize into Sensei IQ, where we can compare the assignment with the allocation to see whether they are in and out of whack. So that's the way that we resolve that. And yes, you're absolutely right. Within Microsoft, these are the three. Well, actually, DevOps is another planning and schedule tool from Microsoft, of course. They are dispersed. They do not have that global resource pool. We consciously actually developed that in Sensei IQ for exactly that purpose, because we continuously get that same feedback, Joe, where people say, well, my department one loves the planner because it's super easy and intuitive, but my very professional project managers, they need to have earned value and baselining and all of those things. And then we have, the citizen project managers, as I like to call them, or accidental project managers that just simply use Project for the Web. The way that we deal with that is literally through our resource engagement model. I'll show you this in a second. And we just use that as an example. I don't want to make this here a sales spiel for our tool, but that is actually exactly the issue that we see with project management tools that only ever have their own schedule engine in mind, without considering every organization has a variety of project management maturity. It's a fact. And we need to make sure that these users are comfortable with the execution tool of their choice. We just bring that nicely together through synchronization. I'll show you. How much time do I have? 10 more minutes, 12 more minutes. Okay, I'll speed up a little bit, which now, of course, brings me actually to exactly that. How important are tools? Well, we already know that that Excel is a good starting point, but as you, as a large organization, want to incorporate a global resource pool, it just isn't enough. And what you really need is an enabler, a digital enabler that gives you the ability for projects, programs, BAU work, portfolios to request resources and then get them approved on the other side. And that's really what we are doing in particular with our Sensei IQ, because we recognize that that is exactly that problem. All right. let me see what, yeah, I'll show you what that looks like. So here is, this is, it's our solution built on Microsoft Power Apps, so no code, low code capability that gives you actually a lot of flexibility as a business user, enhancing the solution. So let's say I'm a project manager. What I do is I'm going to go to my list of projects, and let me just go to one that I've prepared earlier here, which is my accounting system update project. So I'm the project manager, just going to open this up. This is now, my stage gate approvals, and I have a whole bunch of different things that I can track. But here I have my resource plan, and it almost looks like an Excel spreadsheet, and that's why I call it. This is the allocation. So what I can do is I can look at that on a monthly or on a weekly basis, or even on a daily basis. It depends how you want to plan your resources. Just going to do that from an easy point of view on a monthly basis, starting in November all the way to August next year. I now have the ability to say, hey, you know what? I need a DBA, a generic resource. So here's now my SQL DBA, and then let's say I need a business analyst. And let's say I need a project manager, just so that we have that as well. And of course, you could also assign named resources if you know, hey, Tina or Paul is actually is vital for that project. You can request them here as well. So what I do as a project manager now is I say, well, you know what? I think I'm going to start with my project manager needs to be there. So on average, I'm going to give him 40 hours a month. It doesn't need to be there full time, and I'll make sure that they are going to be allocated throughout that timeline of that project. And then I need a business analyst. I give the project manager some time to plan, and then my business analyst, I need him, let's say, half the time, so 80 hours. Oops, sorry, that's 80 hours a month. And of course, you can have them as much as you like. And then I need to have my DBA who starts building up my database, and he needs to be there, let's say, full-time, 160 hours, and then another full-time month, and then I give him another 120 hours. So what I've done now is I built up on an allocation model just simply my generic resources. I can save that. I don't have to submit that at this point in time, and literally can build up my schedule if I need that, and then translate, of course, the total effort into that resource plan. But it's important because that draft is already stored, and when I do the analytics, I can show you what you can do with drafts. And here I could now say, hey, my business analyst, you know what? Now Tina is really good, so I'm going to talk to my resource manager and I say, hey, can I have Tina, please? Spelling helps, please. And as a German, I should be able to do that. See it even as spell check. That's awesome. And I have now communicated certain, certain requests that I have for this particular resource. So as a project manager, that's really all I need to have. All I need to do. 960 hours of proposed work over November to March have now been updated. And what I do is I'm submitting that time. And that's really all I need to do as a project manager. Once I've done that, I can save and close my project. And what I do next is I'm going to take my project management hat off, and I'm going to put my my resource management hat on. So I just, as a team lead or resource manager, I got a notification and I know that there's a resource demand waiting for me. So I can now go into my resource demand, and I will now see all of the projects that have resources or roles associated that were requested where I am the resource manager. So not the entirety, you could of course see that all, but in my instance, these are all of the projects that have requests regarding my particular resources. And I can see that this accounting system update is at the 960 hours. You can see that business analyst, project manager, DBA. And of course, as a resource manager, I could also have that as a resource centric view. So if you don't want to do that on a project by project, but on a resource by resource management level, you can see we can toggle that either way. Now, in order to keep it a bit more simple, I'll just stay with my project here. And as a resource manager, I can now go and say, okay, let's talk to this project manager here. What did he say? And the business analyst. Let me have a look at that. Can I have Tina, please? Okay, let me have a look whether I can assign Tina to that. So what I do is I'm going to add that resource, which essentially replaces the generic resource with the named resource. And I'm going to check whether Tina is available. Actually, Tina is available in the time frame that I have between November and March, actually April. She has 68 hours available. All right, let's assign her to that. And what you can see, Tina is now fulfilling the proposed work of that business analyst. But in November, she actually already is over allocated. Her capacity is 176 hours, but she's already elsewhere committed 276 hours. So that's the reason why it did not automatically fulfill that commitment. So I have now different abilities. I mean, I can be super mean and I can say, you know what, Tina, you're going to work overtime, and I can commit her. Of course, for, oh, actually, sorry, that's not right. It is, of course, not this one here. Sorry. Not this one here, it's this one here. I can say, okay, I'll commit you now to 80 hours. That means you will be overcommitted, but I can satisfy that request. At the same time, I can see that right now she actually has 48 hours available in this particular month. So I could actually now take these over allocation over to the next month, and I can literally spread this over and can ensure that we have now literally over allocated Tina to this particular request. And of course I can do this with all of them. Same with DBA. I'm going to add my resource now, and I can see all of the availability of my named resources, and I can just simply associate them. If they can fulfill, based on their availability, can fulfill this particular request, I can actually do that then and there. So I have literally fulfilled this request here. I'm going to just tell the project manager, yes, I have assigned Tina, and we are done. So this is how you literally start to, as a resource manager, start to outline your project. The last one is the project manager. Let me have a look who's available here. Oh, Andrew is already there. Let me get Albert as a project manager. Let me put them on here. And again, I now have the ability in that instance just to get that done, over allocate him in here and over allocate him in there. Not that I would recommend that. And then I have put him over allocated here, and I'll give him another over allocation here. So he will, this is of course a monthly view, he will have to work a couple of hours per week overtime. And I have now literally fulfilled that request. I save that. That now brings a notification to the project manager. If the project manager opens that up again, they will actually be able to see that these resources are now allocated. And that's how we ensure, after that allocation, that the project manager then can assign their resource to planner, to project, to DevOps, to JIRA, to any schedule tool that they want to have. What that translates to is then ultimately the insights. And that's super important, because the reason why we have that centrally available, it will now literally allow me to look at my overarching availability. And again, that's the last dashboard that I'll show you before I then move on. I'm conscious of time. We only have 3 minutes left, where I can now see all of my work here, and I can say, okay, show me all of the committed work across my organization, and I can see which, well, that there is still across my entire organization, that there is still a lot of work that I can fulfill. Of course, I can then break that down and say, hey, how much committed work does my IT department have? And you can see my IT department is actually quite full. If I now would also outline the proposed work, so the work that hasn't been approved by the resource manager, I can see that they're actually starting to get over allocated. I can even go as far as saying, well, actually, developers are the ones that I need. So that's how we deal with ensuring that multiple execution tools can be utilized, but at the same time, I have the ability to assign those resources. Okay, 2 more minutes. The last slide deck before I then open up for questions is, apply resource management. Well, look, resource management at the best of times is not easy. It's not too easy. Make sure that you assess where you are in your project management maturity. Make sure that you understand your organizational maturity generally when it comes to work management and resource management. Understand your own environment. How many different processes and tools and types of resources do you have? Build a resource management roadmap. At the start, try to figure out, where do I want to be? What's that end goal? What kind of information do I want to, and insights do I want to gain in my resources? And then, you know, define your resources, define the resource process first. Based on that maturity model, I hope that that this can actually give you, you know, some guidance of how industry standards work, and that will then also allow you to, you know, to execute that roadmap that you started. With that, I know I only have 1 minute left. I'm open it up for questions. Do you have any question? Carol, thank you, Carol, for the feedback. That's great.
Hi, Mark. Jamie from ATO.
Hi, Jamie.
You most probably don't have enough time to cover it off, but you showed that resource plan view, the resource pool plan view, which is really good, what's proposed and what's committed. Is there an easy way to show the resource pool actual, so we can take some lessons learned from actually what happened and look at you know, what our current resource availability looks like?
Yeah, definitely. So we have an allocation variance insights that allows us to look at my forecast, my planned and my actuals. The way that we do that is we have a timesheet capability where you can actually maintain the actuals, or resources can maintain those actuals, and that allows you to do those variations.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I know you guys have sacrificed your lunch, and I really thank you for that. Any kind of questions that you have afterwards, please submit them. Alice will send out a package, and I'm sure also an online form. Any kind of recommendation and suggestions, feedback, please let us know. We do run these Ask the Expert sessions based on the feedback that we get. This was actually one example where, based on our last resource management workshop, a lot of people wanted to know, well, what is all of that resource management maturity about? I hope it was worth your while, and I thank you very much for, you know, for your time.
Great session. Thanks, Mark, and thank you all for joining. We'll see you at the next one.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.